Next from Springfield, we go one-on-one with Dan Long, director of the Government Forecasting and Accountability Agency that collects and publishes economic data that's used by the state legislature to help them form the state budget. This runs about 30 minutes.
Dan Long, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel.
It's great to be back.
Before we start, we who are around the Capitol use these phrases like COGFA, which is your agency, but for those who aren't around the Capitol, what does that stand for? And just give us a brief synopsis of what it is you do.
It's the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability. We're a legislative support agency, so we're part of the legislative branch of government. And we are charged with providing the legislature with information on the Illinois economy, doing revenue estimates each year before they start the budget process. We also have some oversight of the pension systems and put out reports each year on the financial condition of the pension systems, oversight of the State Employees Group Insurance Program, and have to put out reports on that each year, and also have hearings when they get ready to do prior to the open enrollment. And then, every year we put out a report on the Illinois economy as well, which we just issued just last week. All of our reports are on our website and available to the public.
So, in essence, the state will come out and put out their budget. The legislature will put together a budget, and they will say, typically, we estimate that we're going to have this much money coming in. We're going to be spending X number of billions of dollars, and here's how we're going to be spending it. And your agency is the one that is nonpartisan, so it gives the lawmakers and the governor some solid numbers upon which to base a budget.
Yeah. It's different than a household budget. I mean, you can't start spending money until you know how much money you have available. And the Revenue Committee, the House Revenue Committee held hearings, as did the Senate Appropriation Committees. And they had us present our estimates of the revenues for fiscal year 15, which was a difficult year, as well as the governor's office of management and budget. And then last year they adopted a House resolution, which included a revenue estimate of right around $35.5 billion. And then this year the House recently adopted a revenue estimate of $34.5 billion, which was actually the numbers that we presented to the committee on what we believe will be the revenue available in fiscal year 2015.
Now, for the viewers, I just want to make this real simple. The fiscal year for the state of Illinois starts on July 1 and goes through June 30th. And when we refer to the fiscal year, it's always the year in which the budget ends. So right now, we're operating in fiscal year 14 because it'll be June 14 when this fiscal year ends. The budget that will be put together this spring is fiscal year 2015.
That is correct.
So when we get into these numbers, we're talking about the fiscal year of 2015 that starts July 1 and will run through June 30th of 2015.
That is correct.
Now, the interesting thing that why 2015 is a different year a little bit than what some of the previous years have been is because in January of 2011, the legislature increased, as everyone I think would know, the income tax rate. But it is going to go down in January of 2015, so halfway through the fiscal year of 2015. What impact is that going to have? Now, you just gave us, just to remind people of the numbers, the revenue that is being projected for 2015 is $1 billion, or at least that they're going to be using, right, as a budget, is $1 billion less than the previous year's budget.
That's correct.
So what impact is this going to have as far as having the tax go off, the tax increase, I should say, go off halfway through the fiscal year?
Well, obviously it's going to be a decline in revenues. The way the law was passed, it automatically, the rates automatically declined from 5% personal rate down to a 3.75%. And from a corporate from 7% to 5.25%. So we're projecting that could actually, over time, we'd lose about $1.8 billion to $9 billion in revenue in that first year. And then
I'm surprised it's even that low. I thought you would have lost even more than that.
Well, it's only 6 months. And the other thing is that when they started the tax, you didn't get the revenues in right away. And so when it goes off, it takes some time for companies to adjust the tax rates, and so you may not lose as much revenue that first year. However, in the full year of 2016, we're anticipating the revenue decrease could be more like $4.5 billion, 4.5 to even $5 billion. But so it could be a significant decrease when we get to fiscal 16, because that'll be the first full year of implementation. The tax rates would have already been adjusted, and we expect to lose significantly more revenue.
Which is why, again, for the viewers, and to keep this in mind, A, in general, and B, relative to the election and what the gubernatorial candidates are saying, as well as those running for the legislature. Already, we have a backlog of bills that we haven't paid, and that backlog, as I understand it, is increasing.
I think it's probably gone down a bit, and it's gone down a bit for a couple of reasons. The legislature adopted a revenue estimate, as I indicated last year, of $35.5 billion. But we anticipate this year, as a result of some better performance from the sales tax and corporate income tax, that we may take in $36 billion. So about $600 million more or so than was projected. The plan has always been, if you take in more revenue, that would go to pay down unpaid bills. And so they have been paying some of those down. So where we may have carried over $8 or $9 billion, this year it may be closer to $6 billion, $6 to $7 billion. So we're clearly not out of the woods by any means. We're still carrying over unpaid bills, but I think that it's going to be less in the next fiscal year, and the payment cycles won't be quite as long as have been experienced.
Well, then that's good news. But again, if we lose $4.5 billion, I mean, this might be a stupid question, but what impact will that have on our ability to pay those bills?
Well, I think it'll be much more difficult to continue to pay them down, without a doubt. I mean, you've been able to because of the increased revenues that we've received, but we haven't, like you indicated, we're not out of the woods. We haven't paid down that total backlog. It makes it more difficult to pay those bills down, because at the same time, you're going to have to make cuts in programmatic activities. I mean, you've got to, most of the money goes to education and social services, and so if you have less revenue, even next year, with $1 billion decrease, there's always spending pressures. There'll be more spending needed for things like Medicaid, the Medicaid program, and for costs of salaries and benefits of state employees. And education needs more money. So you've got those spending pressures at a time when you're going to have at least $1 billion less in revenue. So there'll have to be cuts in programs unless there's something else that's done prior to the tax coming off in January.
Yeah, you know, no one wants to go out and say we're going to cut education, but or that we're going to cut services for the needy. But as we were talking, 44% state spending goes to education, and so that's both elementary, secondary, and higher education.
That's correct.
But also, that's not all money going into the classrooms. I mean, people might interpret it that way. Education spending also includes the pensions, what the teachers' pensions, is it?
Right, it includes the contributions the state makes to the teacher's pension and the state university retirement system as well.
So to some extent, it is 44% of the budget, but it's a little bit misleading in that it doesn't all go into the classroom.
Correct. But I think it's all considered education expenses, so they include those contributions as part of the education budget. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's part of the teacher salaries and benefits or university employees' benefits, so that it's not all for classrooms. That's correct.
And then human services make up about 39%. When we say human services, what are some of the programs that would be under that umbrella?
Well, the major program is the Medicaid program.
Healthcare for the indigent.
Correct. And that's actually growing now, as you know, with the expansion under the Affordable Care Act. You've got individuals coming on that are eligible under the new guidelines, but you've also got individuals that have been eligible all along. And I think that the administration's assuming that about 2/3 will be under the 100% being reimbursed by the federal government, but about a third of those are going to be what they call woodwork, people that have always been eligible, and then the state only gets reimbursed 50% of those costs. So the Medicaid cost will be going up. And then you also have the Department of Human Services, and they operate all of the mental health centers and those types of programs that also require a lot of state expenditures.
When we have the legislature in and different ideas are proposed, some ideas come out of the legislature, some the governor would come up with. So the governor, so as we talked initially, you would give the lawmakers some, I wanted to say hard numbers, that might be a wrong, but that you give them in as much as you can a pretty good idea of what the revenues would be to work with.
Yes, and we believe that our estimate's a conservative estimate. I think the worst thing you can do is give an estimate that's overly optimistic, and then they appropriate those dollars to be spent, and you don't get them in, and you have to try to cut during the year. So we've indicated that we believe this is a conservative estimate, and if there's adjustments that need to be made after we get in final payments, say in April, and we see that the income tax is coming in better than we thought, well, maybe there'd be some more money available. But at this point, we think this is a conservative revenue estimate. It's the estimate that the legislature has adopted, and it's a little bit less than the governor's office of management and budget estimate.
But the thing I was going to say is when the governor proposes something like as is now as part of the Affordable Care Act, as other people will use the phrase Obamacare just so people know what we're talking about, the governor wants to expand Medicaid spending, as we just talked. And in other words, the point is when someone has a proposal, and whether it's the governor or the legislature, do you, what we would say in Congress, score that? Do you give them a cost estimate of what that program would be and what potential impact that would have on the state budget?
We did not score that particular program. The Department of Health Care and Family Services that has all the numbers and works with the federal government, they provided the estimates on that. And of course, the federal government covers 100% of those newly eligible individuals that are becoming on to the Medicaid program. But then after, I think it's 2 or 3 years, that phases out. The state will have to pick up 10% of those costs, and that's a cost.
Right, so the feds will pick up 90%.
90%, but of those that are coming on that were eligible all along and just didn't realize it until they maybe got on this system to register, the state will only get 50% of those costs, and so that'll cause the Medicaid program costs to go up.
So if we look out 2 or 3 fiscal years ahead, years like say 2018 to 2020, in that period of time roughly, the Medicaid costs, unless something were to change in the program, might be expected to have a fairly large increase.
Yes, it'll continue to be a significant spending pressure on the state government, absolutely. It'll continue to demand more of the resources available.
And just as does your agency, does COGFA run numbers that far out, or do you just work year to year? Do you say, almost like the ghost of Christmas future, if you enact this, this is what's going to happen in these out years?
Well, we're required to do a 3-year budget plan. So I mean, 3 year in terms of revenue projections. So we definitely project out the revenues, and you can somewhat project out expenditures as well. And you'll see that, particularly with the drop off in the taxes, in the corporate and personal income tax, that you start to see a larger and larger gap between your revenues and your expenditures, which means that there'll have to be some reduction in spending, or some other revenue source to make up that difference, or a combination.
How do we have, in your estimation, currently a balanced budget?
Well, I think the balance is whatever the legislature considers a balanced budget. I think that when you have a budget that continues to carry over $4 or $5 billion unpaid bills, it's hard to say it's balanced. I mean, if you were just not making payments in your household budget, and you're just extending your credit cards over a longer period of time and paying interest on it, it's difficult to say that's balanced.
Yeah, yeah. so practically speaking, it's not balanced. Sometimes we use different phraseologies, especially in government. So the point would be, then as we look forward into these out years, the 3 or 4 fiscal years ahead, do you recall, I mean, how out of balance would we be? Are you projecting, I don't want to please stump the band here, but I'm just wondering, I guess what I'm trying to think in terms of for the voters and both, as we assess in this election cycle and what's being proposed by various people running for, say, governor, what would be the consequence to us as a state and as to individuals relative to our ability to keep functioning or putting money into education and all that services that government provides if we have this expansion of Medicaid, and what impact would that have fiscally on us?
It's not just Medicaid. You're going to continue to have demands in the education community. I mean, education, elementary and secondary, the State Board of Education is asking for $1 billion more in spending in fiscal 2015 at a time we're going to have $1 billion less in revenue. And we know that the Medicaid expenditures are going up, and we know that the costs of general state government are going up as well. So I don't have exact numbers in terms of the out years, but you can assume that these expenditures increase at least at the rate of inflation, if not higher. And if you're having your tax revenues continuing to decrease significantly, I mean, you know, $4.5 to $5 billion, the gap grows very large very quickly.
Yeah, so I mean
you could be in a range of $8–10 billion in 2016.
Just to put it simply then, if we allow the tax increase, I'm not arguing in favor or oppose, I'm just laying out the facts here as much as we can. If we allow the tax increase of January 11, which is now supposed to go off in January 15, if we allow that to go away, in the following fiscal year we'll be down by around $4 billion in revenue, and at the same time that we'll be kicking up because of federal spending, we'll be incurring higher costs in a variety of fields. So we also don't know what the impact of the pension will be, because that still has to be decided by the Supreme Court.
That is correct.
How do you, as an agency, where you're trying to give, again, lawmakers and the governor good numbers, I guess the governor has somewhat his own number of crunchers, but when you're trying to give people in state government good numbers, how do you handle a situation like the pensions, where the pension was increasing the costs by $1 billion a year, but now you don't know what the Supreme Court's going to be? Do you give them 2 different scenarios if it's enacted, or if they throw it out?
Well, what happened this year is they didn't assume any savings. I think the savings is projected to be 1.5 to 1.6 billion in once it's enacted. There were none of those savings included in the fiscal 15 budget, because everyone knew it was going to go to court, and it could take 2 years to have this work out. You may not have it decided in by fiscal 2016. So I think the prudent thing to do, and the legislature was very prudent in this, is not count those savings until you have some definitive ruling from the courts. And you can't. You really just can't do that because nothing changes. Now, the pension increase, as you indicated, and it is true, last year went up about $900 million, and fiscal 13 went up $1 billion. It's leveled off. This year, I think the increase to the pension systems is less than $200 million, the incremental increase.
Now, why is that, do we know?
Well, in part, it was a result of investment returns. 2 years ago, the stock market was down, and the systems got in significantly less. In fact, I think it was close to zero when they're assuming around 8.5%. They've lowered those now to 7.5% for 2 of the systems, and teachers 7.75. This year, they had double-digit returns, close to 18–19%. So you only get revenue from 3 sources in pensions: the employee contributions, the state contribution, and investment returns. So when investment returns are down, then because of the state law and the formula that's used, the state has to put in more money. This year, everything's working well. Investment returns are very good, so the contribution by the state is just a normal contribution. So,
which is an important point too. That I think people who don't personally invest don't understand why we have a stock market, and they don't see the connection between the market performance and how it actually does impact them in a significant way, whether they invest personally or not. And this is one because of all these pensions funds, whether state and private, or that's where their money is invested.
Absolutely.
It matters
In equities, yeah, they're very well diversified in equities and real estate, some in venture capital. And when the market does well, as it has, they've done well. We adopted something called smoothing a few years ago, so that when they have losses, it's smoothed out over 5 years. And the same thing, that when you get significant investment gains like they did this year, it's smoothed out over 5 years. Well, offset some of these big
swings in the stock market valuations.
Correct. That's right.
So we have the money going down. We've talked about that, the tax increase. That could be, there may or may not be a move to extend that so that we don't lose the $4 billion. Again, do you run different scenarios on something like that? Do you say if the tax is kept or if the tax isn't kept, and how it goes? And
sure.
To whom do you share that information, and how do you share it?
Well, we certainly share it with the legislature, and usually make, our commission meets, and we provide that information to our commission. We're a bipartisan commission. I should have said that in the beginning.
So you're almost like a committee. You have different members of the House and Senate on your oversight board, right?
We have 6 members of the House, 6 members of the Senate, 6 Democrats, 6 Republicans. We're currently co-chaired by Senator Michael Frerichs of Champaign and Representative Jill Tracy of Quincy, who both happen to be running for statewide office. But we meet, at least once a quarter, if not more, commission to present this information. And then we're often asked to come to present the information to the House Revenue Committee, the Senate Appropriation and Revenue Committees as well, so that everybody knows kind of what's going on. I think it's just critical that you have an idea of what's going on in your revenue base before you can really start doing anything with the budget. And the House has done this now for the last several years, adopted a resolution, adopted a revenue number. They take that number and then they divide it amongst the 4 appropriations committees. There's an appropriations committee for public safety, for education, and human services, and general government, general services. So they then allocate those funds, and those appropriation committees have to work within those numbers. And this year they're going to have to make reductions, and they've had to do that in the past. And it's very difficult when you have to start making cuts in state government.
The average citizen doesn't think that we've cut anything, just that we keep spending more and more and more. That might be true as a top line. I mean, it often is true as a top line number, but where has if in any areas, has the state cut back on its expenditures?
Well, I think they've obviously cut back in the education area, even though that the foundation level may be $6,000 per student. Because of the lack of funds, they're only giving them 80 or 85% of that allocation. So you've seen cutbacks there. I think you've seen attempts to certainly reduce or control some of the increases in the human services area with the SMART program that was passed to go through the Medicaid eligibility rolls and try to remove those who are no longer eligible. That process continuing. Of course, now we're getting more people into that program as a result of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, as you mentioned. The governor's closed some facilities. We've reduced state government in terms of the number of employees. I think that really we've got one of the lowest state workforces in terms of population of any state right now. So there's been attempts to control spending over the last several years. And like I said, the other thing is they've adopted some conservative revenue estimates, and if more money came in, you're able to use that to pay down the backlog of unpaid bills.
How long have you been running COGFA?
14 years.
As you look back, how would you assess where we are fiscally now as compared to over that 14-year period?
A very difficult situation. We're probably in a more difficult fiscal situation than I've seen in my years here.
And are you encouraged or not encouraged as you look forward into the next 5 years?
Oh, I think I'm encouraged.
And I know we should say you're not a partisan. You're strictly just a numbers cruncher, and you try to provide a service. So nothing you're saying, I don't want to be interpreted by the viewers that you've taken any position on policy, but just
And to correct the fiscal imbalance, you can only do things. You got to reduce expenditures or you have to get revenues. And I think what normally happens in these cases is some kind of a combination. Some kind of a combination. I would think that maybe they're going to keep part of this income tax, not let it go down to the levels that it's slated to go down. And this is just me talking. And at the same time, you're going to have to try to control the expenditures on the other side. As you know, there's been a bill introduced too for a progressive income tax, but that's prohibited right now by the state constitution, and that takes a 3/5 vote in the House and Senate, and it has to go to the voters. So that's a lengthy process, and I don't know if that would occur. And then that's not something that's an immediate solution to begin with.
You say, first of all, for the voters would have to approve that so that, like at the federal level, those who make more money would pay a higher percentage of their income.
Perhaps. We haven't seen how it would actually be implemented, but I would think that could be the safe assumption. Right now, it's just a flat tax. And if you go to some progressive tax, I think as you make more money, you'd probably pay a little higher tax.
We use this term, and we'll close out here quickly here, but we use this term scoring. But basically, that's just a way of saying when someone proposes a bill, they might, and it's a spending bill or a fiscal bill, they would say, if this were enacted, what would the cost be to the state, or what revenues would it have to the state? How often is scoring a part of your workload?
Oh, we do it on a regular basis because every bill that's introduced that impacts revenues, we do an estimate of whether it'll increase or decrease revenues. Any bill that would impact pensions, we do an analysis on what that impact is going to be in terms of either increasing the pension costs or decreasing the pension costs. And we do it to a certain extent on some programmatic activities, but not all the programmatic activities because we simply don't have the resources to do that. But if we're asked to do it on something major, then we do that. But we do a significant amount of analysis of legislation that impacts revenue, impacts certain areas of spending in state government.
Now, anytime you do something like that, and it's just like, there's presumptions. You're presuming any number of things. You're taking your best educated guess looking into the future. Do you ever look back and on those, you're not going to go back on the bills that didn't become law, I guess, but on those that do become law, do you go back and kind of see how you're scoring compared to the reality, and does that help you make better informed decisions and analysis?
Absolutely. And we do it on a regular basis on revenue estimates. Like I said, we increased our revenue estimates in November after the fiscal year had started. We plan to increase it again this year by about $250 million. So, on a $35 billion base, a $600 million increase is not a huge percentage-wise. I mean, that's a pretty good estimate. But there's things that occur in the economy that can impact how your revenues come in each year.
Yeah, and of course you can't control the national economy, and if it goes down, then that's going to impact us.
Right. And Illinois' economy's not done as well as the nation. Our unemployment rate's continually been higher than the national level and higher than the Midwest. So we lost a significant number of jobs during the Great Recession, and we haven't really recouped those as some other states have. So those are all things that we monitor and look at.
One last thing aside that might impact the revenue, and it's kind of been discussed for a number of years, is the expansion of gambling or gaming, depending upon what phraseology we want to use. Have you run any numbers on that? And if that were to pass, what kind of dollars would? Because I can just imagine somebody might say, if we pass gaming, we can allow the income tax to go down. But what kind of revenues would it mean for the state if the gaming expansion were to go through?
Not as much as you would think, because what happens with gaming, we have a lot of gaming out there now. We have a number of boats out there. We're just implementing the video gaming, and there's like 14,000 terminals, and that's probably going to go up to like 22,000. And so what happens is that, just like when we have a new boat that opened in Des Plaines, that's generating a lot of revenue, but it's taking revenue away from the boat in Elgin. So there's some cannibalization that takes place. So I can't remember the exact number, but it wouldn't solve your problems at all. I mean, it would generate some revenue, and we're already seeing now. I mean, we peaked out in terms of getting like $700 million a year, I think, from riverboat gambling, and it's dropped down to close to $400 million over the last several years. Not only from competition as you put on new boats in Illinois, But Indiana's added new boats right across the border from Chicago, and you get a lot of gamers going. As you know, down in the Metro East area, you've got a number of casinos that opened in St. Louis that have taken away from the boat that's in East St. Louis or in Alton. And so there's a lot of competition among gaming. It doesn't generate the kind of revenue that you would even if we added 4 or 5 new boats. A casino in Chicago would probably bring back some of those that are maybe going over to Indiana. But no, it's not a solution to certainly wouldn't come anywhere near to generating the $4 billion, $5 billion you're going to lose from the income tax. I mean, you may only get a few $100 million a year from a big expansion like that.
Well, Dan Long, thanks for sharing your information with us, and we appreciate you joining us again on the Illinois Channel.
It's always great talking to you.
Thanks.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.